Welcome to the Purpose-Based Retirement with Certified Financial Planner Casey Weade. Casey is the president of Howard Bailey Financial.
Whatever risk you face during your retirement years, we've got a plan.
A published author and radio host.
It's not how much we make during the good times, it's how much we keep during those really bad times.
His advocacy for retirees and pre-retirees has made him a sought-after speaker and trusted financial leader.
And putting a real plan together.
This is the Purpose-Based Retirement.
I'm Lee Kelso here with Casey Weade. He is a certified financial planner and the president of Howard Bailey Financial. We're going to start the program today explaining something called a modified endowment contract. Now, if you haven't heard of that before, don't feel bad. I hadn't either, and we're going to find out more about it here in just a moment, and we'll be taking callers' questions in just a few minutes. But I want to get into this modified endowment contract, Casey. I'm not a professional, but I've been around enough to have heard a few things, but this one's new to me. Is this a new product?
No, modified endowment contracts have been around ever since life insurance has really
Do I know them as a different product?
For a long time, until the IRS actually changed the rules. But what it is an overfunded life insurance policy. So if you were to sit down and take the Certified Financial Planner board exam, they would tell you to never take and turn a life insurance policy into a MEC or a modified endowment contract because some of the tax treatment changes. But there's pros and cons to doing it, and we're going to go through some of those things here with you where it might make sense.
Okay, so let's walk through the downside first. Why don't I want them? You just mentioned that there's a tax consequence included.
Well, when we overfund a lot, and what's happened is a lot of people, what happened was they made tax-free withdrawals available from life insurance policies. So you could actually take withdrawals and take loans tax-free from your life insurance policy, and that's one of the big benefits to overfunding a life insurance policy, but not overfunding it too much where it becomes a modified endowment contract. So that gives us the ability to, maybe you had an old Northwestern policy or Mass Mutual policy or Pacific Life policy, some old life insurance policy you've had for the last 20 or 30 years, and when you first started making contributions to that, you wouldn't be able to get any of your original investment out, right? You started with $100 a month, and if you put in $1,200 the first year, you could get back $200 because there were penalties inside of that account. Now, over the years, eventually it got to a point where you broke even and it actually started creating a decent rate of return. I sit down with people all the time today that have old whole life insurance policies that are making them 3-4% a year, and they could get their money back if they wanted to get it back today because it's 20 years down the road. There aren't any penalties anymore. Now, if we can do this today on day one, where we can get ourselves a vehicle that's going to make us 3 to 5% in interest, get us a decent interest rate that's better than what we're going to be able to get at the bank, and not tie the money up if we create a MEC or a modified endowment contract. So we've overfunded this life insurance policy so much so that the IRS looks at it and goes, now wait a second, you're not using that as a traditional life insurance policy. That looks more like an investment. Maybe your costs are only 1-2% a year, but your growth potential is as much as 10% if the market goes up. So now you've got an investment vehicle, the IRS says. So now they're going to say, if you take a withdrawal from that account, we're going to tax it like we would tax your IRA, a non-deductible IRA or a tax-deferred annuity, where now if you take a distribution, it's going to be last in, first out, so your interest comes out first, and it's growing tax-deferred until you need the distribution. But there's a death benefit attached to it, right? So if we never actually spend our original investment, which is why we typically use this for our overflow emergency reserves, if we want to pass these things on to our heirs but still have them available, we could set aside, say, $100,000, have a $300,000 death benefit. The $100,000 is still available. We could get it back at any time. It'll probably make 3 to 6% a year, and then if we never spend it, we didn't have to pay taxes in the meantime,
right,
and it passes on to the heirs tax-free in the way of a death benefit, or we use it for long-term care purposes prior to that. So there's a lot of different reasons we could use this vehicle.
So it sounds like in that process then I'm actually reducing the cost of my insurance because it's serving other purposes as well.
Exactly. I mean, that's really the benefit of overfunding a life insurance policy. Take, for instance, that example. We put in $100,000 and it's got a $200,000 $100,000 death benefit. If you put $100,000 and went out and bought a life insurance policy, now you've got a $500,000, maybe $1 million death benefit. If we only have a $200,000 death benefit or a $300,000 death benefit, now our cost of insurance is much lower, so much so, especially if we have a guaranteed interest rate. Let's say we have a guaranteed interest rate of 3% a year, but our cost of insurance is only $1,000 or $2,000, 1 or 2% a year. Well, now we've got a guaranteed return of our original principal, because our principal is not going to be ate up in cost of insurance.
Right.
And if it's indexed to the market, like some of these can be, we can index to the market where we might have the ability to make 10, 15% if the market goes up. So a much higher cap than you're going to get on an annuity, and it's totally liquid. So if the market goes up the next 12 months by 20%, I get 10. If it goes down 20, I don't really make anything, but I don't lose anything. And this is why this became a great vehicle for me to use as well. You know, I had a lot of cash that I had on the sidelines over the last couple of years waiting on a good time to put it into the market when the market was at a better valuation. But I've seen, as all of us have, as markets have gotten extremely expensive over the years, in one of the most expensive markets in history, this gave me the ability, if I was wrong and the market continued to rise, I was able to participate in those gains to a limited extent. If I was right and the market tanked and it was down 20%, or maybe it's down 50%, I can take everything out of that vehicle, it's liquid, and I can put it back into the market.
So, as an emergency fund source, you like this product?
I like it for emergency reserves. Is it a great place for income? Not such a great place to take regular income, because typically how they credit interest, and it just can't be set up on systematic withdrawal typically. And it's not necessarily a great place for us to say, I'm never going to touch these dollars again, and I want to maximize my legacy because we're getting a smaller death benefit. And it's not necessarily the best place for long-term growth, because the markets are probably a better place over the next 20 or 30 years for long-term growth. But if we're looking for some place to stick some cash that you've had sitting on the sidelines and you want it to make a better rate of return you're making on the bank, but you don't want to tie it up in an annuity and maybe get some other benefits along the way, where else are you going to go put your money where it's not tied up and you can make a better rate of return than you're making on a CD even, or a fixed annuity?
Is there a minimum entry point?
Well, it depends on your age, but because it kind of depends on your insurability. Not everybody can qualify. If we're 25, for instance, if I'm 30 and I put $140,000 in, I've got $1.5 million death benefit. Now, if I am, and I could probably put in as little as $20,000 and make it work. Now, for my dad, who's 65, he needs to put in about $60,000, and his death benefit's only about $150,000. So that typical entry point's around $50,000 on average, unless maybe you're 20 to 35 years old.
All right, we got to leave it there. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about MECs, I assume those are covered in your new book, are they not?
They are.
The 2017 Guide to Maximizing Retirement Efficiency. You can order that online at thepurposebasedretirement.com, or you can also download for free the first chapter of Casey's current book, The Purpose-Based Retirement. We are back with questions from viewers in just a minute.
When you have confidence in your retirement future, you can live the life you've always imagined. Because of planning, you now have time to reflect on the wonderful memories of your life. You and your spouse finally have the luxury of leisure time together. To spend fun times with your grandkids, sharing the joy of their excitement about life. Smiling at the thought of quality time with your children and of picking up the check. At last, you have time to breathe and rekindle the love of your life. Why? Because you imagined what could be. You planned for retirement. So today, you own your future.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts, Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson, every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
And Marshall is with us right now, as a matter of fact. He is a certified financial planner at Howard Bailey. We're going to be taking questions from viewers. And Jen from Paulding, Ohio, you are up first. Go right ahead.
I'm beginning to look for a financial advisor, and I'm finding that the compensation structures are somewhat confusing. It seems that the fee-only advisors are the only ones that the only way to get conflict-free advice. Are they all that they're cracked up to be?
Well, Jenny, I can sympathize with you because I've personally had the same struggles with the whole compensation structure for financial advisors, owning a financial planning practice and trying to eliminate as many conflicts of interest as we possibly can as we've grown over the years from being one advisor to having multiple advisors in multiple states. That becomes a real challenge because I'm here to tell you there is no perfect way to compensate a financial advisor. There's always going to be some type of conflict of interest, despite what the fee-only advisors might say, where they say, we're the only ones that are completely conflict-free. That's just not the case, any more than it's true for a commission-based advisor or a fee-based advisor. There's three types of advisors out there. There's commission-based that only are able to create different products and get you invested in investment vehicles that generate commissions, whether that's an A-share mutual fund or trading stocks, trading bonds. And now, are there pros to that? Yeah, they've typically got some of the most widespread availability of the products that are available in the investment world today. However, there's more conflicts of interest under that umbrella than you're going to find with, say, a fee-only advisor. A fee-only advisor is someone that's going to have the ability to use most financial products, but they're fairly limited when it comes to guaranteed investment vehicles or when it comes to taking care of life, health, long-term care, disability benefits. They have to sell away. They have to have you give those funds to someone else. And the way they make more money is if you put those dollars in their fee-based managed portfolios. Then what's their conflict of interest? To get you to take on more and more risk once they're in that portfolio, because the faster your portfolio grows, the more money they're able to make. And you call and say, hey, should I pay off my mortgage? They say, whoa, I don't want you to take a distribution from our portfolio. They won't tell you why. Why? Because they would actually lose some income when you took that distribution to pay off the mortgage. Maybe they have a fiduciary responsibility to you that a commission-based advisor doesn't, but if they're still not trustworthy, it really doesn't matter anyways. And so what we've chose to do here at Howard Bailey is to do a fee-based structure, and that means that we're kind of a combination of the two. We believe that when we're taking risk with your life savings, then we should be fee only, meaning when you make more money, we make more money, you lose money, we lose income, we've got some skin in the game, and we have fiduciaries. You won't see any churning of the accounts because there's no reason for us to do that unless it makes you more money or protects you against the downside. And then we still have the ability to fill in some of those gaps when it comes to the risk side of your portfolio. Do you want guaranteed income? Do you want some protected growth? Do you want life, health, long-term care, disability? We can take care of those gaps in the risk planning as well.
Yeah, Casey, I just feel like there's no perfect answer. You hit the nail on the head there. What you want to do is just look for somebody that you can trust, build some rapport with. We talk all the time about finding independence. We want somebody that's independent, that's not working for just one firm. You talked about the commission-based side of things. With the Department of Labor ruling here, the fiduciary law is going to come into effect where most people are going to have to work in that fee-based area.
Maybe
when it comes to Trump may repeal that. So we'll see, Lee, if that comes about. But I think that's all great advice. But just building trust, rapport, that's absolutely what you want. Is somebody that you can rely on to give you honest responses, but also with 100% transparency. Tell me how you get paid. Tell me where it's coming from and where I can
think this is so confusing that I wrote an article in Kiplinger about it. If you want to go to Kiplinger, just visit our website, click on the Kiplinger tab, and then you'll be able to read an article about the pros and cons of all these different compensation structures that are out there. You know, if you're young and you're just getting started and maybe you need some help getting started, maybe a commission-based advisor is great for you because you couldn't meet the minimums that a fee-only advisor or a fee-based advisor has. Maybe you're a very astute investor, you want to implement the plan yourself, go to a fee-only advisor. You're in retirement, you want as many options as you can possibly get, but you want a fiduciary, come to a fee-based advisor. There's a lot of options and there's pros and cons to each.
Jenny, I think your question touched a nerve, huh? What do you think? Let's bounce down to South Whitley. And Damien, you're next on the program. Damien, go ahead.
I've always been a dividend stock investor trading on my own account. It's never made me uncomfortable when the market was down because I just reinvested my dividends. As I retire, what are the risks to just using my dividends as retirement income strategy?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, Damien, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if you want to use that as a dividend income strategy, if you've been trading on your own accounts, you've been through the bad times, the 08s and the 01s, and maybe even the 87s if you've been investing for that long, then maybe you're used to some of the big swings even the best companies in the world are going to take when they're being traded on the New York Stock Exchange. But the biggest risk, more than anything else, I would say, is just panic. You're going to be able to generate those dividends, and hopefully they don't cut the dividends in the really bad times, but when those stocks go down in value, it can cause panic and you may end up selling at a bad time. If it gives you peace of mind, you know how to manage it, you can maybe go a year, 2 years without taking any income. That might be a great thing to do. Take Chevron stock, for example. Chevron stock pays about a little over a 4% annual dividend, but from 2014 through 2015, it lost about 30% of its value. Could you have held on to it? Would you have reinvested your dividends, or would you have taken your dividends? There are risks to that, and you just have to be worried about, more than anything else, what your peace of mind is going to be like when you open up your statement. You still get your paycheck in the mail, but you open up your statement and it's down 10%, 20%, 100 grand, 200 grand.
Yeah, I have no problem with the strategy in general, and there's certain people that have a higher risk tolerance than others. But I would recommend going through 2008 and being an advisor that worked in a lot of these strategies. My folks that were in retirement was the greatest challenge. So when we're on a fixed income, just know that dividend yields have dropped quite a bit. If you've got a substantial enough portfolio, that's great. But if you don't, I want you to build in some emergency reserves, and maybe if you kept a few months aside for reserve income, maybe make that twice as much or 3 times as much, just so you can weather the next storm in case it's a long one.
All right. Christy, I'm going to ask you to be quick with your question for us here.
My husband and I are retiring next year, and we just need to make 3% per year in interest to satisfy our income needs without touching any of our principal. Our broker says it's not possible without buying bonds, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that risk. It doesn't seem like it's a lofty goal. Can I do this without market risk?
Well, Christy, as we're short on time, I'm not going to go through all the different investment options that are available to you today, but can you do it without market risk? Absolutely. We're not in a 0% interest rate environment. We're just in a very low interest rate environment. We can still find places that are backed by legal reserve systems to pay you 2%, 3%, maybe even 3.5% as just a purely fixed rate. We maybe even get you a little bit more than that, maybe in that 3 to 5% range if we're willing to accept a year every once in a while where we have a 0% rate of return. If we can accept a little volatility with principal protection, we can probably get you more return. But yes, you can get 3% without investing in things like bonds and things with default risk.
All right. Thank you all. Good questions all. We hope that you'll check us out at thepurposebasedretirement.com. You can learn more about Casey's new book, The 2017 Guide to Maximizing Retirement Efficiency there. And you can also download the first chapter of his current book, The Purpose-Based Retirement, absolutely free, no cost to you at all. Here's our question of the day. What is the current 5-year CD rate? Is it down there at 10%? No, it has to be 0.1%, right? That's right, 1/10 of 1%, or all the way up to 3.21%. We have the answer coming back.
You may have a purpose for your retirement, but have you repurposed your assets to help you achieve your dreams?
At Howard Bailey Financial, we believe in the purpose-based retirement. We help you determine a clear plan of action to get you to your goal. We can help you review all of the variables, find and understand your options, and help you come up with a strategy that gets you closer to your purpose. Let Howard Bailey help you achieve the retirement you deserve.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts, Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson, every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
So our question today was about the interest rate you get on a 5-year CD. Casey calls those certificates of disappointment. So I think
you stole my joke.
I did. I took your line. So I think that might give you a clue as to what is the average rate, Casey.
Well, the certificates of depreciation could also be 1.72% is roughly the average 5-year CD rate, and that's something we picked up from bankrate.com. And I think something even more interesting, it seems like the last time you could get a 5% CD was a lifetime ago, as we've been stuck in this low interest rate environment for so long. But I want to show you a chart from Bankrate that illustrates that it really wasn't all that long ago that you could go out and get yourself a 5% paying CD. If we go back to 2005, we can see that the average CD rate for a 5-year CD was about 4% a year, meaning we could probably go find a 5 or even a 6% CD if we looked hard enough. Going back to 2000, now that's only 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the average 5-year CD rate was 6%. And if we go back to 1985, that's about when interest rates peaked, and we would see that we could get a 5-year average CD rate was almost 12.25%. So it means that we probably could have went out and got a 15% or maybe even more paying fixed rate CD. And maybe you're sitting on your hands saying, boy, I wonder when this is going to happen. I think they're going to raise interest rates next year. You know, maybe it's the year after. Maybe it's 6 months from now, and you're just waiting and sitting in cash trying to get to that point. But I'm here to tell you that some of these times may never come back. I want to show you a chart that illustrates that fact. This faint blue line that you can see here is the history of the 10-year Treasury yield that has peaked back in 1981 at 15.5% for a 10-year Treasury bond. Now, if we look closely, we can see that we saw 25 years right here of interest rates that were over 6%. So we only had 6% plus interest rates for 25 years since the mid-1800s. We're going over 150 years of interest rates, and we can see that we only had 25 years of those where interest rates were above 6%. The rest of those were largely well under 5%, and that average being right around 4%. So interest rates may never go back to where they once were back in the early 80s or mid 80s or late 70s for that matter. So it's time to start preparing today and asking yourself, am I getting a big enough bang for my buck? What do I really need? What's my required rate of return? Do I only need 3 to 5%? Well, if we only need 3%, then maybe we need to start getting 3% today rather than waiting for 5 or 10 years for interest rates that may not rise over the next 5, 10 years. Or maybe we're waiting to get into the market and we may not see a better market valuation for the next 5 to 10 years. So let's get you on track today. Let's take a look at some different places we can possibly help you earn a fixed rate of return that's better than what you're getting today. And there's this conundrum that we have. When we look at the relationship between rate of return, risk, and time, there's always a trade-off that we have today. We didn't have as many of these trade-offs just 10, 15 years ago, but now we have more than ever. And that's the point of the purpose-based retirement, is say, what's the use of the money? And let's get it there in the most efficient way we possibly can. If we want to increase that rate of return, today we have to do one of two things. Either we have to take on more risk, or we have to take on a longer time commitment. And those risks can be labeled in the low to moderate to aggressive category. First, let's take a look at some of these lower risk fixed interest options. These are going to be places that are backed by some type of legal reserve system. We have CDs that we can pick up at the bank, fixed annuities, floating rate fixed annuities, government bonds. A CD pays around 2%, a fixed annuity around 3%, a floating rate fixed annuity where we get a floor of, say, 1.5% plus LIBOR. So today we might be getting close to 2%. If interest rates rise, we get even more. A government bond at 1.25%. And all of these companies only let us take the interest out every year without incurring some type of penalty. And the penalties vary. For a CD, what's the penalty? Well, for a CD, the penalty is that we get the interest penalty typically. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even 12 months worth of interest today. And you have to watch out for some of those that are principal actually penalties. Then there's fixed annuities, floating rate fixed annuities. We pay a higher penalty for a higher rate of interest. So we have those trade-offs. Then we have government bonds. Now with government bonds, that's a little different, right? We buy a 5-10-year government bond. It's paying us 1.5%. And then we want out. Well, if we want out, we get the market price. So if interest rates go up, that means nobody wants your low interest bond and you have to pay a pretty severe penalty that might be higher than the annuity penalty and definitely higher than the CD penalty. Well, what if interest rates go the other direction? So interest rates continue to fall. Well, your bond may be worth more because people want your higher interest paying bond. These are all of our low risk investment options in order to increase those fixed rates of return. What about those more moderate categories? When we take a look at that moderate category, we're going to see things like blue chip dividend stocks, senior secured loans, preferred stocks, investment grade bonds. And these are all fixed income instruments paying somewhere between 4 and 6% on average. And our liquidity here is interest only unless we want to sell it. If we are able to sell it, then we get the market price. So take, for instance, what we mentioned earlier. Let's say we get a Chevron stock that's paying us a 4% dividend, but now it's down 30% and we want to sell. We're taking a very stiff penalty. If we take a look at the risk, it's moderate across the board, but we can take on a little bit more risk for higher yield. Some of those higher yielding places might be things like high yield bonds, also known as junk bonds, maybe real estate investment trusts, master limited partnerships, business development companies. All these places probably picking us up somewhere around 6 to 7% in the way of yield. Our liquidity is interest only, and our penalty is the market price if we can even sell it to someone or find a buyer in the first place. Some of these might be totally illiquid. These are going to be the highest risk investment options. And what you might want to do is find out if you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. Take a look at your portfolio. Are you getting these types of yields? If you're not, then you might be more of a growth-oriented investor living in an income investor's body, or vice versa. So really make sure where you're at in your life, if you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, and what type of risk you're taking. You may want to also think about something called your paychecks and your playchecks, and you don't want to mix those two things up. Some of the plans we put together take our fixed income instruments backed by legal reserve systems, and the paychecks that we can't afford to lose are secured, while we might take some of those moderate and more aggressive options for things we like to call our playchecks. Back to you, Lee.
Well, there you go. Lots of things to think about, and that's one of the reasons that I always counsel you to have a team behind you, a professional who understands how all of this works. And one place you can get started is by visiting the purposebasedretirement.com. That's where you're going to find Casey's new book, the 2017 Guide to Maximizing Retirement Efficiency. You can even download a free chapter of his current book, The Purpose-Based Retirement. You can learn more about the company by visiting howardbailey.com. Roll over onto that website, and there's the contact information you need if you want to send a question to Casey. We may use it here on the air on the future program. You can also request a complimentary financial review of exactly what's going on in your world at 482-9559. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.